بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا. وأعوذ به من شر نفسي إن النفس لأمارة بالسوء إلا ما رحم ربي. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المطهرين المكرمين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم وهو أحسن القائلين وأصدق الصادقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما محمد إلا رسول قد خلت من قبله الرسل أفإن مات أو قتل انقلبتم على أعقابكم ومن ينقلب على عقبيه فلن يضر الله شيئا. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the purification of the souls, the enlightenment of the hearts, for the hastening of the reappearance of the awaited Savior, Ajjal Allah Ta'ala Farajah Sharif, enlighten your souls and the atmosphere with the recitation of salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Salamun Alaikum wa Rahmatullahi wa Barakatuh. Thursday, the 24th of Safar, 11 years after Hijrah, is arguably one of the most understudied or under-referred incidents within the biography and the illustrious life of the glorious Prophet of Islam and the best of God's creation, the Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Indeed, you and I are told that the Prophet of Islam passed away on Monday, the 28th of Safar. And on 4 days before him passing away, according to Sunni and Shia historians, on a Thursday, history records what is known as the calamity of Thursday, or Raziyatu Yawm al-Khamis. This is arguably one of the most well-documented incidents in both historical records of the Sunni and Shia traditions. You find that this incident is amongst many within the life of the Holy Prophet. His seerah is studied extensively, despite the fact that it is quite strong in terms of the presence of the traditions in history of this incident known as the calamity of the Thursday. You don't necessarily find it referred to in many discussions when it comes to the Muslim world. Yet when it comes to the idea and the Aqeedah, as far as the following of the Holy Prophet of Islam is concerned, it is of the utmost importance. Because I recall about 10 days ago, we were honored to be in the presence of His Eminence, Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali As-Sistani Hafidhahullah. And whilst we were discussing with him a number of things, one area that he himself referred to, and I remember because it was only 10 days ago, and he emphasized on, is this incident. He referred to this incident in the discussion surrounding the idea of finding the school of Ahl al-Bayt. Because somebody asked him a question, he said, is it fair that some people are not born as Shia, they're not born as followers of the Ahl al-Bayt? His response was that when it comes to this, one is able to reflect very quickly upon the traditions and historical records, especially those which are as clear-cut. He would say that one of those that one needs to reflect upon and study and emphasize, he said, was this idea of the calamity of the Thursday. Yes? Why? Because you find in chapter 2, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us this: تِلْكَ أُمَّةٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَلَكُمْ مَا كَسَبْتُمْ. That was an ummah and an event that had happened. You do what you are responsible to be doing, and they do what they are responsible to do. وَلَا تُسْأَلُونَ عَمَّا كَانُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. You will not be asked by the way they did. Therefore you find many people, scholars and others from other schools of thought, they come and say, we will not discuss what happened on that Thursday. Why? It's nothing to do with us. The Quran says, don't worry about the past. Think about only your time. Leave that which is in the past. Allah will hold them accountable, and He will hold you accountable for your own deeds. They say that's the verse there in chapter 2 of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah. Of course, when we look at the verse, this verse doesn't reflect or doesn't point to this idea that many Muslims unfortunately have wrongly understood. Why? The Quran is full of references of the people of the past, the story of Fir'aun, the story of the different prophets that came, and the Quran invites us to reflect upon those stories to make sure that we don't fall in the same mistakes as those before. Likewise, the studying of the seerah of the Prophet and following the life of the Prophet is an obligatory aspect of the life of each Muslim. I can't say, well, I don't care about the life of the Prophet. It's not something that concerns me. On the contrary, I should be an individual who's fully aware of what happened during the time of the Prophet and extrapolate lessons from it. Theological lessons, spiritual lessons, historical lessons, social lessons, and economic, as many other lessons as possible from what actually occurred during the lifetime of the Holy Prophet. So what does this verse mean? This verse is a reflection of the idea that you and I will not necessarily be held accountable for the people of the past. Meaning that I do not necessarily, if I'm from the people of Kufa, for example, oh, but you let down Imam al-Hussein. Oh, I am just here from the people of Kufa. Yes, some of them let down Imam al-Hussein, but doesn't mean I am responsible. This doesn't mean you should not study history. It doesn't mean you should not reflect upon historical occurrences. Number one. Number two, some people say this incident causes division between Sunni and Shia. Well, I tell you, if a man who is the grand Ayatollah and followed by millions, hundreds of millions arguably of the Shia around the world, himself said, remember this incident, and he himself says, don't call the Sunnis as your brothers, call them as ourselves. Yet he himself, as witnessed by over 150 people, including myself, said you must speak about this incident and you must highlight that you are a Shia and your identity is the follower of Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. You see, we are neither the people of forsaking our aqidah and the history, neither are we the people of the extremists who cause division within the Muslim Ummah. The idea is to be in the middle, which is what? Which is to follow the teachings of the Maraji', which is to not to attack via usage of certain words or public cursing of certain people, but at the same time not to say, oh, but it will hurt some of our brothers and sisters, therefore I will not speak about it. Therefore I will stay quiet about the calamity of Thursday because it's concerning the second Khalifa, and I will not speak about what happened to Fatima Zahra because it affects Muslims and they are respecting the second Khalifa. This is very critical, because sometimes what happens is we fall into these extremes. Either don't speak about it or speak in a way which is not in line with the teachings of the school of Ahlul Bayt and our Maraji'. The idea is to speak about it and to present history and let the people judge. Let the people come to their conclusion. Yes? Likewise, therefore, when you come to this incident, where do you find it? You find it in Sahih Bukhari, at least in 3 places. Volume 4, Volume 7, and Volume 9. You find in Sahih Muslim, yes, Book 34, and several other places in Sahih Muslim. Therefore, there is absolutely no doubt that this incident happened in history. Nobody can say, no, I don't think it's authentic. No, it's established, no doubt about it. What are the issues that you and I should be understanding theologically, spiritually, that are of critical importance as far as the examination of the event of the calamity of Thursday is concerned? The first thing to understand is that the Prophet of Islam, a few weeks before passing away, assembled an army. An army, why? Because there was a man who was the wali, the governor of Sham at that time, who was a non-Muslim, heard about the Prophet, became a Muslim. The Roman Byzantines decided to kill him. Therefore, the Prophet of Islam assembled an army headed by Usama ibn Zayd ibn Haritha. Usama was 19 or 20 years of age. According to historical records, as shared by all Muslims, for 16 days the Prophet of Islam said to the army, said to Usama, you assemble the army outside Medina. Not a single member member of the Muhajirin and Ansar, except a few from the family of the Prophet, were given exclusion from this. So they were all told, you must go and join the army of Osama. Yes, of course, some of the prominent ones would come forward and say what? They would come forward and say, no, we cannot join. When they were asked why, they said, he's too young to lead us. Therefore, what happened? The Prophet of Islam became, at that moment when he heard that these people had abandoned, and you see, if you go to the commentary of Nahjul Balagha by the Mu'tazilite, non-Shia, Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili, he says, in my opinion, the Prophet of Islam wanted to ease the succession to Ali ibn Abi Talib, and that's why he would send these prominent, so to speak, members of the community outside Medina. But of course, they would reject. When they rejected, the Prophet of Islam, according to the book Milal al-Nahl by Shahristani, who is a Sunni, yes, very famous book that describes all the sects in Islam, he came and sat on the member of his mosque, and he said, I heard there are people who have not gone to join the army of Usama. La'anallahu man takhallafa an jaysh Usama. Whomsoever I said go and did not go, may Allah send his la'na upon them. The Prophet of Islam said, what happened thereafter is what? What happened thereafter is he came, he asked, who hasn't been? They told him, the first Khalifa Abu Bakr and the second Umar. He came to them and said, why have you not gone? First one said, it's because I have to pledge my allegiance to you. So I came back to pledge my allegiance to you. The second Khalifa said, it's because I heard that you are ill and I wanted to find out about your health. Therefore, what do we find? People came and gave certain excuses to the Prophet, despite the fact that the Prophet of Islam had clearly said that you must go and you must fight with Osama. Therefore, the Prophet then decided to do what? Decided to gather the prominent companions and those who he wanted to speak to on this Thursday. Ibn Abbas, the famous companion and narrator of hadith, one day was seen crying so much that under him the ground was wet due to his tears. Someone came to him, and this is narrated in Bukhari, so again nobody can dispute. Yes, if you have a chance, you go online, sahihbukhari.com, type Thursday on it. You'll find this narration in volume 4, volume 7 and volume 9. Someone came to him and said, what's the problem? He looked at him and says, it is the Thursday. And what calamity was the Thursday? So they asked him, what actually happened on the Thursday? Ibn Abbas then narrates what happens. He says, the Prophet of Islam gathered them and the companions, the ones who were there, and asked them. He said to them that I wish to leave you something in which if you abide by, you will never go astray. Very well. Then, of course, the Prophet did not wish to just say it. He wanted to make it documented in their presence, because some of them would leave and say, no, the Prophet didn't say this, and there would be what? A dispute. So the Prophet of Islam wanted to make sure that is absolutely what? It's determined there and there. Nobody would then be able to dispute when it's seen that is written. He then, of course, asked for what? Ink and paper. Bukhari does not mention who it was. Sahih Muslim mentions who it was. Bukhari says somebody from amongst them said, Innahu la yahjur. He has gone delirious. He's lost his mind. He's gone crazy. Yes. Therefore, don't give him a pen and paper. What happened was some of the companions wanted to give the pen and paper to the Prophet. There are those who were with the second Khalifa did not want, and there was a commotion that each started shouting at the other, but you know, should we, shouldn't we? The Prophet of Islam, of course, in that state would say to them, Qumu anni, rise, leave, because there should be no dispute and the raising of the voice in the presence of the Prophet. This is where in the Holy Quran. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tarfa'u aswatakum fawqa sawti an-nabi. Oh, you believe, do not raise your voices over that of the Holy Prophet. Yes. He said to them, leave. Now, it's interesting. Bukhari says that before he said to them, leave, he said to them, I'm going to tell you what I was going to write. Interesting. Not something we share. It is exclusive to Bukhari only. He says the Prophet said to them, I am going to tell you three things. The first is that you make sure you drive out any pagans, idol worshippers from Medina and from Arabia. Drive them out. Don't let them exist in the whole of Arabia. Number one. Number two, if you get guests from other cities, welcome them, be hospitable to them. He said, number three, the Prophet said what? I forgot. Not I forgot. Bukhari from Sa'id ibn Jubair says, I forgot. He said something, I'm not sure it was. He puts these three and says that is what indeed was said. Now, what kind of importance, why is this so important that, for example, Ayatollah Sistani would mention it now, given this, all this going on, so-called sectarian violence around the world, yet he would say mention it, speak about it. Why? What is the theological aspect and why is this so critical in the discussion that is presented today? The first thing to point, of course, is that in numerous occasions, the Prophet of Islam has agreed, as found in Sahih Muslim, would say, I leave for you two weighty things, the Book of Allah and my progeny Ahl al-Bayt. Inni tarikum fikum al-thaqalain, Kitab Allah wa itrati Ahl al-Bayt. There is absolutely no doubt that the Prophet of Islam wanted this to be documented. And the fact was that he wanted to emphasize the importance of the leaving of the Book of Allah and his progeny. That is what they stood against him. But the idea that emerges here is this. First of all, what does the Quran say about disobedience of the Prophet? People say, okay, fine, it was a mistake. Somebody should not have said this. The second Khalifa should not have said this, that the Prophet has, God forbid, lost his mind or gone delirious. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please remember this verse or the reference for this verse, because anybody who discusses this issue should be well equipped with what? With where the hadith is found, and then support it with the Quran. Because nobody can doubt when you place the Quran in support of what? Of the discussion and what happened in history. Chapter 33, verse 36. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. Allah says in chapter 33, verse 36, the believing men and women do not have a choice when Allah and His Messenger say something. They do not have a choice. They can't argue. Yes, they can't even suggest. They have to submit. Why? Because the Quran says, Al-Nabiyyu awla bil-mu'minina min anfusihim. The Prophet has authority over every single human being more than the human being has over themselves. Meaning what? Meaning, we are told in fiqh, all Muslims agree, if you and I are performing salah, we are not allowed to break our namaz, normally, unless it's an emergency, something's happened. But if the Prophet calls us, then we must break our salah. Because the Prophet's authority comes first. Yes? The Prophet, and this verse does not say at certain times of his life. It doesn't say only when he's well. It doesn't say, it says all the time. During the entire life of the Holy Prophet, yes? Then, interestingly, chapter 33, verse 36 says, وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. Whomsoever disobeys Allah and the Prophet, فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا مُبِينًا. They have gone astray, a manifest way. They have really gone astray from the path. ضَلَّ, yes? اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Those who have gone astray. The Quran says, if you disobey the Prophet, you have gone astray. Yes, number one. Number two, what does the Quran also come forward and say? Yes, the Quran says that if you raise your voices in the presence of the Holy Prophet, your deeds will be wiped. Yes, your hasanat, your good deeds will go. Yes. Therefore what? It's considered to be an unacceptable matter. Number 3, the Quran is very clear. لا ينطق عن الهوى إن هو إلا وحي يوحى. The Prophet does not speak from himself. Everything that the Prophet speaks is revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The theological basis, and I would like the mu'mineen and our sisters to think about this, that the world went crazy, rightly so, when Salman Rushdie produced a book against the Prophet of Islam. The Muslim world went really angry when there was these cartoons drawn by Charlie Hebdo, yes, which were blasphemous against the Prophet of Islam. If today somebody was to come on YouTube for 5 minutes, 1 minute, and say, excuse me, a message to the whole world, I believe the Prophet is crazy, he's gone astray, he's gone delirious, what would be the response from the Muslim world? What would be the response? The Muslim world will immediately erupt in anger. There will be flags that will be burnt. There will be effigies that will be burnt. Yes, people will be killed. They say, this man, not only, he must be killed, they will say. Yes, yes, isn't it? The theological aspect behind it is what? Is that when it comes to the leadership, when it comes to following an individual, yes, here is a clear example of how the believer, how an individual who follows the Prophet must understand the path of haqq, the path of righteousness, and the path of virtue that they must follow in order for them to be considered what? Of the people of salvation and true believers. Yes, that's the first level as far as the theological aspect associated with it, yes, is concerned, because there are many examples in the life of the Holy Prophet where the companions actually disobeyed the Prophet, and the Quran condemns, from the story of, for example, Badr. So told the second Khalifa of the Prophet saw Quraysh, and the Muslims saw Quraysh. The second Khalifa said, no, Quraysh has never been defeated, we cannot find them. Yes, in Uhud some of the companions disobeyed the Prophet. So therefore you have examples of people today. When we commemorate the sad demise and the martyrdom of the Holy Prophet, we have to think about this, that when it's a similar discussion when it comes to Ziyarat Ashura or Ziyarat Warith. What do we recite? We say, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً سَمِعَتْ بِذَلِكَ فَرَضِيَتْ بِهِ. Yes. There are communities and groups of people who are individuals who necessarily might be pleased with what happened, necessarily might follow in the footsteps of those who committed wrongdoings. Yes. Therefore the question today is what? When you and I are presented with this story, of course we immediately think with ourselves, it's as clear as the sun, it's very evident as far as the incident is concerned, and what does it mean as far as the Muslim world is concerned and the following of the right group of individuals is concerned. Yes, but the second question and the final point we mention here is that we have to ask ourselves, are we individuals who are becoming disobedient to the Prophet? 2. Becoming disobedient to the Prophet is also something that the Quran warns about us. Indeed, there are people in history who disobeyed the Prophet of Islam because he would come forward and give advice and make sure that what? People, for example, would respect his family members. But how did they treat his family members, for example? Today, when you and I are coming across our own practices, when it comes to faith, when it comes to the religion of Islam and the way we conduct our affairs as far as the deen is concerned, are we deliberately, because sometimes we disobey the Prophet without, we make mistakes, but are we making a conscious decision to go against what the Prophet of Islam has actually stipulated? For example, the Holy Prophet, Al-Rasul Al-A'zam wa Nabi Al-Akram Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, famous narration, he says, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir fala yu'dhi jarah." Whomsoever believes in Allah and the day of judgment does not hurt their neighbor. In other words, there is a responsibility as far as the neighbors are concerned. Yes, if I am intentionally causing what? Causing discomfort or hardship towards the neighbor, and I'm not paying attention to this, then I'm what? I'm disobeying the Prophet of Islam, no doubt about it. Yes, the Prophet of Islam would say, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir." فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ يَصْمُتْ. Whomsoever believes in the day of judgment and Allah must say good or remain silent. Yes, when I am out there, yes, when I say things that I shouldn't be saying, then what? I am clearly disobeying the Prophet. Therefore, of great importance is understanding the incident has many dimensions, and indeed one of them is its application to our day-to-day life. And truly those days after that calamity of Thursday was one that was difficult for the Holy Prophet, but especially for his Ahl al-Bayt, for those who had surrounded them. And we are told, you know, every person has a right to leave a will, but they did not allow the Prophet of Islam to leave a will. But he did leave the will to his Ahl al-Bayt. We are told in our own narrations, he would give this will many times. He would include the names of all the Imams, alayhim as-salam. And indeed, one of the instructions he gave to Amir al-Mu'mineen is that when I pass away, make sure you use the kafan that was brought down by Jibreel to wrap me with. The Imam alayhi salam would know about this kafan. I told you this kafan is where can we find this kafan? The narrations tell us this kafan was bought, this shroud was bought by Jibreel when the Prophet wanted to bury his wife Khadija, but he had nothing to wrap her with. And that's why the Prophet of Islam was presented with this kafan. Yes, this kafan which had a number of important features. Yes, the fact that it was from Jannah. The Prophet of Islam would wrap Khadija with that. Yes, he would wrap whom? He said the kafan has got 5 parts. One is for Khadija. One, he said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, use the part that is for me. Yes. Amir al-Mu'mineen would find out, and when he would look at the kafan, the Prophet would say, the 3rd part of the shroud is for you, O Ali. The 4th part is for my daughter Fatima, or the 3rd for my daughter Fatima. The 4th is for you, and the 5th is for my son Hassan. Yes. Allahu Akbar. How would Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen respond when the Prophet of Islam would say that there is a kafan for each member of the Ahl al-Bayt except for Abu Abdullah al-Husayn? Yes. These my final moments in the life of the Holy Prophet were not easy. He was bidding farewell to Sayyidatun Nisa Fatima. The narration says that Sayyidah Fatima, there's no one who cried over the Prophet as much as Fatima to Zahra. Yes, she cried and wept when she was next to her Holy Father. Her father would whisper something in her ear and she would be happy. Then later she would say, he would say to me, I am the first who would join him from his Ahl al-Bayt. I tell you, the Prophet of Islam had his family members around them. And his final moments, Fatima to Zahra would be able to bid farewell to her family members. Amir al-Mu'mineen had his family members. Imam al-Hassan had Abu Abdullah next to him. But Hussein on the plains of Karbala was all by himself, with no family, with no one in his final hours. Yes, in his final moments, he was all alone on the plains of Karbala. Indeed, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would be the one who would narrate that when he came to bury the body of his father, Abu Abdullah al-Husayn, 3 days with no washing, with no kafan, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would say, Assalamu ala man ghusluhu damuh. Peace be upon the one whose ghusl is his blood. Yes. Wa kafanuhu turabuh. His kafan is the soil of Karbala. Indeed, when Imam Zayn al-Abidin would place the body of his father inside the grave, the narrations say that when he was doing so, he asked for a piece of cloth. When Bani Asad asked why, he said, I would like to gather the body parts of my father Hussein because they've been torn into pieces. Those of you who have been to Karbala, and may Allah grant you tawfiq to visit Abu Abdullah, you'll see that the place where he was slaughtered is different from the place where he is buried. It is because the horses, when they trample kneeled on the chest of Hussein, on their hooves. His body was moved several meters, left and right. Yes, when Imam Zain al-Abidin would want to place his body inside the grave, he was not able to do so, because every time he picks up a part of the body, another would fall off. When he placed the body inside the grave, Bani Asad, they said, we saw that he came out of the grave. Yes, we saw he was looking for something. When he came back, in his hands were fingers of Abu Abdullah, the fingers that were chopped off after he was martyred. Bani Asad said, but by Allah, he did not finish. He left the grave open and he went wandering around the plains of Karbala. When he returned, we saw under his cloak he was carrying a young baby. Imam al-Hussein had said, place the baby on my chest, bury the baby next to me and place him on my chest. Imam Zain al-Abidin would place the baby on the chest. Yes, he would place the young 6-month-old Ali al-Asghar on the chest of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Indeed, Imam Zain al-Abidin would close the grave. He would put on the grave, this is the grave of Hussein, who was slaughtered thirsty and all by himself, madlum in Karbala. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. There is a brother of ours from our community who today was taken to intensive care. He really requires our dua. I would like to ask you to raise your hands on this night as we remember the greatest human being, the Prophet of Islam and his martyrdom. Let us raise our hands and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his shifa and the shifa of all mu'mineen and mu'minat. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibu al-mudtarra idha da'ah wa yakshifu as-su'. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 يا الله شافي وعافي مرضى المؤمنين والمؤمنات بحق مريض كربلاء زين العابدين. I ask you to recite Surah Al-Mubarakah Al-Fatiha for the souls of all marhumin, but before it, salawat.